The photo is on the mantel, same spot it's been for years. Anniversary number whatever, both of you dressed up, both of you smiling, arms around each other in front of some restaurant neither of you remembers the name of anymore. Anyone who walks past it assumes exactly what it's supposed to make them assume. Happy marriage. Solid. The kind of picture people use as proof. What nobody walking past it knows is what happened in the parking lot 20 minutes before that photo was taken, or the particular silence in the car on the way home after. Here's what surprises people about this one. The smile in that photo probably wasn't fake, not entirely. That's the part that makes this so much harder to untangle than a simple lie. You didn't pose for a picture you didn't mean. You just posed for one small, genuine moment that got frozen and mounted on a mantel as if it were the whole marriage, instead of the 3 seconds it actually was. Researchers who study exactly this kind of image have a name for the split you're looking at. Psychologist Paul Ekman and his colleague Wallace Friesen spent years studying the difference between a felt smile and a posed one, and what they found is that most people can't consciously explain how they tell the two apart, but they can feel it almost instantly. A genuine smile pulls at the muscles around the eyes in a way that's almost impossible to fake on command. A performed one usually stays in the mouth and never quite reaches there. The photo on your mantel might have both kinds layered on top of each other in the same frame, and even you might not remember, looking back at it now, which one you were actually wearing that night. Here's the turn most people don't expect. Researchers at UC Berkeley once went looking through an entire college yearbook, decades old, and sorted the smiles in every photo into genuine and posed. Then they tracked those same women for the next 30 years, checking in on their marriages and their overall life satisfaction along the way. The women with the real smile in their yearbook photo were significantly more likely, decades later, to report stable, satisfying marriages. A single frozen expression from one afternoon in college quietly predicted something about an entire life that hadn't happened yet. If a 3-second expression can carry that much signal forward, it raises an uncomfortable question about what your own anniversary photo might be quietly broadcasting about the years surrounding it, whether or not you meant it to. Think about what actually happens in the minutes around a photo like that. There's a specific kind of tension that builds right before the shutter goes off, where to stand, how close, whether you're supposed to look happy or effortlessly happy, whether the last thing said in the car still hangs in the air or not. Then someone says smile, and both of you produce one, on command, regardless of what was happening 30 seconds earlier. That's not exactly deception. It's more like a reflex nobody taught you directly but everybody somehow learned anyway. When the camera comes out, the argument goes on pause. Here's where the story turns again, because this reflex isn't unique to you, and it isn't new. There's an old story that circulates among people who've spent careers photographing families, a couple and their teenage kids arriving for a portrait session hissing at each other like they'd been fighting the whole car ride over, nobody wanting to be there, tension thick enough to see. Then the photographer lifts the camera and says smile, and for exactly the length of the shutter click, they become a completely different family, the one that ends up framed on somebody's wall looking like they stepped out of a magazine. The photo wasn't a lie. It was real, for the 2 seconds it existed. It just wasn't the whole story, and nobody hanging it on the wall ever mentions the 10 minutes before. There's an older version of this pattern that predates every camera and every mantle, worth remembering before you assume this is a new problem invented by social media. Long before phones existed, families still commissioned formal portraits, still dressed everyone up, still demanded a smile on command regardless of what the ride to the studio had actually felt like. The performance is ancient. The camera just made it easier to produce on demand and easier to display permanently, in a frame that never ages and never updates itself to reflect whatever's actually happening this year. There's a specific piece of research worth sitting with here, one that complicates the easy assumption a lot of people make. A study published in a major social psychology journal found that people dealing with relationship insecurity are actually more likely to post relationship content and share happy photos, not less. The anxiety itself seems to drive the performance. But a separate study, this one out of Arizona State University, found almost the opposite pattern in a different context. Couples who genuinely felt satisfied, invested, and committed were the ones more likely to visibly share their relationship at all. Put those two findings side by side and you get an uncomfortable truth. The exact same happy photo can be produced by two completely different marriages, one that's thriving and simply documenting it, and one that's anxious and trying to manufacture proof of something it's not fully sure is still true. From the outside, both photos look identical. Only the people standing in them know which version they were. Here's a specific moment worth sitting with, the one a lot of men in your position eventually stumble into without meaning to. You're scrolling back through old photos for some reason, a slideshow for a family event, or just an idle evening, and you land on an anniversary picture from years ago. And instead of the warm nostalgia you expected, something else arrives first. A flicker of memory about what that particular year actually felt like, underneath the photo. Maybe it was a hard one. Maybe you weren't talking much that year, not really. The photo doesn't know that. It just holds the 3 seconds it was given and calls that the truth of an entire year you both quietly struggled through. Here's the twist inside the twist, the part that catches a lot of people off guard. The photo isn't lying to anyone else nearly as much as it's quietly lying to you. Every time you glance at that mantel, your brain registers a small, automatic confirmation. See, we're fine, we've always been fine, look at the proof right there. That confirmation happens instantly and unconsciously, long before you'd ever consciously reflect on whether it's actually still accurate. A photo doesn't just document a marriage. Left on display long enough, it starts quietly managing what you believe about it. There's a further wrinkle worth being honest about, one that complicates any simple fix. Some years genuinely were good, and the photo from that year is an accurate little window into something real. Other years were harder, and the exact same ritual, dressing up, standing close, producing a smile on command, still happened anyway, because skipping the anniversary photo would have felt like admitting something out loud that neither of you were ready to say directly. So the archive on your mantel isn't one consistent story. It's a mixed collection of some real years and some performed ones, filed under the same warm lighting, indistinguishable from each other unless you actually remember what each specific year was like underneath the frame. There's also a specific kind of pressure that shows up around milestone years, the 25th, the 30th, the ones with a number attached that everyone expects you to celebrate loudly. That pressure has nothing to do with how the actual year went and everything to do with an external expectation that a certain anniversary deserves a certain kind of photo, regardless of what preceded it. A lot of the most performed smiles in any family's archive cluster exactly around those milestone years, not because those years were harder than the others, but because the stakes of the photo itself were higher, and higher stakes make genuine expressions more effortful to produce on command in front of a camera that's waiting. Here's a layer almost nobody says out loud about this. Some men privately worry that acknowledging the gap between the photo and the reality of a particular year feels like betraying the marriage somehow, like admitting the smile wasn't real is more disloyal than the years of quiet disconnect the smile was covering for. That worry runs exactly backwards. The smile was never the problem. Treating a 3-second expression as a substitute for an honest look at how the year actually went is the part that quietly lets distance keep accumulating behind a picture nobody ever questions. Here's where the stakes actually rise, because this isn't only about one photo on a mantel anymore. If you've built an entire visual record, anniversaries, holidays, vacations, decades of frames, that consistently shows the good 3 seconds and never once shows the other side, you've built something closer to an alibi than an archive. And alibis exist for a reason. They're built when some part of you already suspects the full story wouldn't hold up on its own. Consider what it would actually mean to look back honestly, year by year, instead of treating the whole collection as one continuous proof of a happy marriage. Some photos would hold up under that kind of scrutiny easily, memories attached that still feel warm the moment you recall them. Others might surface something you'd rather not examine too closely, a stretch of months you both quietly got through rather than actually enjoyed, dressed up and photographed anyway because that's simply what the calendar called for that year. Neither category makes the marriage a failure. What matters is whether you're willing to tell the difference between them, instead of letting 30 years of frames blur into one undifferentiated story of constant happiness that never quite existed exactly that way. This is the honest turning point, the one worth sitting with the longest. The real risk was never the smiling photo itself. Genuinely happy marriages take plenty of them, and there's nothing dishonest about capturing a real good moment and being proud of it. The real risk is using that photo as evidence, closing the case, and never checking again whether the marriage behind the frame still matches the one being advertised on top of it. Here's one more angle worth naming before closing this out. Children who grow up around a wall of these photos absorb something from them too, whether anyone intends it or not. They learn, implicitly, what a marriage is supposed to look like from the outside, and some of them carry the template directly into their own relationships decades later, assuming the goal is producing the photo rather than living the year truthfully behind it. If the archive on your wall has been quietly teaching that lesson for years, it might be worth considering what you'd actually want it to teach instead, the next time a camera comes out and someone says smile. Here's what tends to actually shift this, and it's smaller than people expect. It isn't taking the photo down, or refusing to smile for the next one. It's a single honest question, asked privately, away from any camera. Looking at that photo, does this still feel true, or does it feel like something we're both still hoping becomes true again? That question risks an uncomfortable answer. It also risks discovering that the marriage is exactly as solid as the photo suggests, which is worth knowing for certain instead of just assuming. The uncomfortable truth underneath all of this is that a photo can be completely real and still be almost completely misleading, not because anyone lied, but because 3 seconds were never built to represent 365 days. Only the two people who live through the year behind the frame actually know which version of the story is true, and the only way to find out is to look past the smile long enough to ask. The good news, if there is one, is that this doesn't require throwing anything away. It requires one honest conversation about what the picture actually represents, had once, on a night that doesn't need a camera at all. I'm Gray, and this is the Quiet 60s, where we talk about the things men in their 60s actually think about, but rarely say out loud. If this sounded like your mantle, leave a comment below. And if you're new here, subscribe. There's more of this coming.